Okay, so it seems that we are ready to get started with this webinar. Thank you all for joining for this second webinar. I would really love to hear where you guys from. So if you can use the group chat to write your country or your location, I would really love to hear where you're from. I know that this audience is very international, and of course, scheduling this call for everyone is definitely very difficult, because you're spread out all over the world. But thank you for joining today, and hopefully you'll be asking a lot of questions. So it's great to see that people from Texas, from Colombia, from Portugal, Berlin, Germany, USA, again Germany, Slovakia, from Chile. Yeah, great to see you all here. Again, thank you for joining. Since you're already there in the group chat, feel free to leave any questions that you have. If you already know a question that you would like to ask, just write it there, and I will answer it during this webinar. If during the webinar you would also like to say something, just raise your hand or let me know somehow, and I will unmute you, and you can join this call as well. So with that being said, let's get started. So what do we have planned for today? Well, two things. First of all, I'm just going to go a bit into how to deal with hard exam questions. In the previous webinar, I discussed this a bit. I just wanted to point out a few additional things. So I'm not going to do the full introduction that I did last time. If you missed that one, you will find the previous webinar inside the course, so you'll be able to watch this at your own time. Now, getting started with this one. So let's start with exam questions. And this experience comes from a lot of students who already went through the course content and passed the exam and confirmed this to me multiple times, that whatever I said in the course works for them, because I really have a lot of students who send me a message every day, who tell me that sometimes they even pass the exams with 100% or 97 point something or 95%. So all of them great scores. And they keep coming back to me and telling me that the course content works very well and that all the advice given in the course works for them. And typically what I said is that in the prep questions, if you manage to get near perfect scores and you understand why a specific answer is the correct one, then you will have absolutely no issues during the exam. So when it comes to the exam questions, you need to understand that you will be in this setting where you're no longer in preparation mode. This is the real thing, and you may be a bit stressed. And stress really is different from person to person. Some students are like super relaxed and have absolutely no issues and manage to finish the exam even in 35 or 40 minutes and not worry about anything. Others are a bit more stressed. The time is running. You already paid a lot of money to take the certification. You prepared weeks or sometimes even months for people who do not have a lot of time to get this exam, and it's the real thing. And for that reason, it may not be so obvious that any mistake that you make can really have an impact on the score that you get. And I'm pretty sure that you're all pretty smart people and you will have absolutely no issues passing the exam. Got me on that one. Passing the exam without any issues. But I just wanted to point out a few things just to put everyone on the safe side. And at the exam questions, it's important that you do not rush. Even if you think that you know the question already from somewhere, maybe from scrum.org, from the open assessments, or you think that's pretty similar to what you've seen in the course or something like that, forget about it. You need to treat every question like you've never seen it before. And for that reason, it's also important to look at every word and to read what the question is about. And most of the time, there is this thing like selecting the best answer. And what this means is you really need to look at which of the options that are available is definitely not a good answer according to the Scrum Guide. And the best answer doesn't mean that is the perfect answer. It is the best answer from the options that are available in that particular question. Some questions are formulated in a way that's sometimes hard to understand, but you can still tell from looking at the answers what is the best answer. And with that being said, it's also important to notice how many answers are being expected from that question. So, for example, the question may say select the best answer or select the 3 best options or something similar. So you need to be aware if you have 6 options and you're supposed to select 3 correct ones and you only select 2 because you misread or you don't think that something else is different, then you will fail the entire question. So you do not get partial points for partially getting something right. So you really need to pay attention to how the question is formulated, how many answers are expected. Sometimes this is very explicit. Most of the questions tell you select the best answers or select 2 answers or 3 or 4 or how many are necessary. A few questions in the exam may also not indicate how many answers are correct. So you may need to select only 1, but you also may need to select, say, 3 or 4. So this is what you should expect in the exam. Now, for very hard exam questions, there's one way that you can deal with them. And I call this a process of elimination. So you look at all possible answers and you start excluding the answers that are definitely wrong. They typically have something that is against the Scrum guide. And say you have to select 3 answers and you already know that from eliminating all the other answers, you have, say, 4 more answers. And then you can start like saying, these 2 answers are like definitely correct. And then you have to pick between 2 answers. So, and then you will be able to tell which one of them is correct, because you always need to think not about what's the logical thing to select. You need to think in terms of what's being said in the Scrum guide when it comes to selecting that answer. So just to sum up this exam tips, read the exam questions, watch out, make sure you understand exactly what's being asked there. Watch for words that may change the meaning, especially for true or false questions. You may forget or not see a not somewhere or something that's negating the question what you have to select. These are the ones that you can easily get wrong. And overall, just focus on selecting the best answer. It doesn't have to be the perfect answer. It just has to be an answer that is not against the Scrum guide. And use this process of elimination. You can practice this even in the prep exam questions that you will find inside the course, just to make sure that you have an understanding on how to deal with longer exam questions that have a lot of answers and where you only need to select a few of them. So before this webinar, I already received a few questions, and I will start with them. But while I do this, I would really appreciate if you can start writing questions in the group chat or letting me know if you would like to ask any live questions. So one of the most common questions, especially for students who have already passed the PSM I exam or the PSPO I exam, is the question regarding what to do next. And this is pretty hard to answer because it depends really in which direction you want to go. Now, I know that many of you are affected by these hard times and trying to get a job or trying to improve your career overall. And definitely taking the PSM I certification or the PSPO I is a good idea, because this will add something to your CV, will complement an experience that you have, or it may help you get a new job if you don't have experience. It's definitely something better than nothing. Now, many of you think that the next logical step would be to take the PSM II exam, or in the case of the product owner certification, the PSPO II exam. Typically, this is rarely a good idea. And let me explain why this isn't necessarily the best idea. I'm not saying it's not a possibility, but it's not always the best idea. And the reason for that is the following. Now, you may have passed the PSM I exam, and you may be overly optimistic regarding passing the next certification. The thing is, with the level 2 exam, PSM II or PSPO II, is that they are exponentially harder, say, than the PSM I. So it's not just an increment it's not just another certification that you can easily get. It's a certification that typically is recommended for professionals who have a few years of experience. Now, I'm not saying this is not your case. It may just be the case that you worked in an agile environment or applied Scrum in the past, and you just didn't have time to get the PSM I or the PSPO I certification. But just as well, it may be that you're just getting started and you may be overly optimistic regarding getting this additional certification. So on one side, the certification is much harder to get. The exam itself is much more complicated. There are fewer questions. Fewer questions means that if you get any answers wrong, then this will have a much higher impact than in the PSM I exam, where you have 80 questions, you get one wrong, no issues. If you have only 30 questions, you get one wrong, then you're already getting toward failing the exam. Additionally, at least from what I know, not a lot of organizations actually make this a requirement. So it's typically good to have a PSM I certification, and for most cases, this is absolutely fine. Not so many organizations actually require to have PSM II. Now, this may be an advantage to you because if there are multiple candidates for a position, having a higher certification shows that you have higher skills or higher knowledge than others in this field, and that you have dedicated more time getting the certification. So this may be one reason why you want to do it, but you should expect to invest a lot of time into getting the certification. And also, there may be other certifications on the market that can make your overall body of knowledge larger than just focusing only on Scrum. For example, how to scale Scrum or other agile frameworks. So that can be also helpful, or overall other, maybe say, software products, or depending on your industry, there can be other certifications that can be added to your profile that makes you a more interesting candidate for organizations, for companies. And not necessarily PSM II, which may be redundant. The same goes for PSPO II. Nevertheless, this is something that has been asked a lot, and I just wanted to clarify it a bit. So just to sum up, PSM II or PSPO II is not for everyone. Don't be overly excited if you passed PSM I. Typically, I recommend that you really think about it if this is something that is really worth investing, if it's worth investing the money in your actually buying the certification, buying the try for the exam, which is much more expensive, but also taking into account what happens if you fail once. Are you willing to pay another time the fee to take the exam the second time? So this may be something interesting. Okay, so hopefully I've clarified this a bit. The next question is regarding the PSM I and the PSPO I exams. The PSM is typically for Scrum Masters, and this is one of the most popular certifications from Scrum.org. It's by far the most popular. And we can safely say that if you have the Scrum Master certification, you generally demonstrate that you are aware of the Scrum rules. And you can safely say also that you don't necessarily need additional certification when it comes to Scrum, not necessarily from Scrum.org. The PSPO I is for product owners, and it's very focused on the product owner role. And this may be very useful for somebody who is coming from this product management background and wants to get into Scrum. So this will be a certification that's very focused on this. Now, what I typically recommend, since a lot of you are already learning for one of the certifications, is to take the other one as well, because they are slightly different, but they definitely overlap for a large part of the contents, mainly because all the information asserted in this exam, or most of the information asserted, comes from the Scrum Guide. And this is valid for both certifications. So the Scrum Guide is the same, regardless if you take a Scrum Master certification or a Product Owner certification. On the Product Owner, I think, is slightly harder, and may require additional learning. But typically, it is something that you may want to look into. So I would say, if you already learned for PSM I and you passed that with a relatively high score means, say you are around 95%. That is a good score, a very good score. And if you have that, try getting the professional Scrum Product Owner certification as well. It's very similar. It may just require some additional work on your side, but then you can say you have both certifications and you theoretically can prove that you have knowledge for a Scrum Master role and just as well for a Product Owner role. This is what I would do. This is the advice that I'm typically giving to students, and I know a lot of them are taking both certifications. Because many of you have requested for me to create a Product Owner course, I have created a Product Owner course as well. Now, if you're taking the Scrum Master course, you will notice that the Product Owner course is pretty similar. And as I said, this is because the contents comes from the Scrum Guide. But still, the prep exam questions are focused more on the Product Owner, and many students were just as happy taking both certifications and just getting over with this overall, getting this kind of certifications from scrum.org and then moving on to other types of learning or just focusing more on the careers. Now, there are some additional questions I received regarding the Product Owner role. Is it mandatory for the Product Owner to inform the development team about any changes to the product backlog? So the background for these questions is more or less in the direction of the Product Owner can change the product backlog anytime. And what happens is that, say the Product Owner has made a change, is the Product Owner, is it mandatory for the Product Owner to inform the development team that something has changed? From the way this question is formulated, you need to understand that this implies that the collaboration between the Product Owner and the development team happens only like following a strict guideline or a strict set of rules. And this is definitely not the spirit of Scrum. And you need to always remember that the Product Owner and the development team are all part of the Scrum team. So they are in a team together. And there is no like ping pong of communication when it comes to the Product Owner and the development team. You need to see their communication as a collaboration. They are all the time supposed to work together to find solutions to any issues that may occur, and overall to inform one another if any changes appear. And for the Product Owner, it's always important to get an estimate from the development team. So say there was already an item in the product backlog and the development team made an estimate for that. Now the Product Owner adds some additional details to it. The estimate that was there is no longer accurate because the details that the Product Owner may have added could completely change the complexity of this item. So for that reason, it is always recommended for the Product Owner to get from the development team a new estimate on that item. Otherwise, the estimate that was there may be totally inaccurate. So just to sum up, you need to always look at the collaboration between the communication between the Product Owner and the development team as a collaboration. They are all in the same boat. They are all in the same team. They need to work together. There are no rules telling exactly, oh, the Product Owner must do this or the development team must do this. You need to think that they both have the same interest, and that is to provide as much value as possible and to build this product and everything. Finally, a question regarding the Product Owner as well and the Product Increment. And it seems that there's a bit of confusion regarding when should the Product Increment be released. And for some reason, some students have the impression that the Product Owner must release each product increment after the sprint. And first of all, this is not true. This is not true at all. Now, what happens is that the development team must ensure that the product increment is releasable, which means that if the Product Owner decides to release it, the product increment has all the qualities as described in the definition of done, which means that if a customer or the user would use the product increment, it will satisfy the requirements there. So it will be something that is usable. Now, there are various reasons why the product owner may not want to release the product increment yet. So it is important that every sprint creates this product increment, but there might be business decisions which tell the product owner that this may not be the right time. Or, for example, the product owner may decide to do a partial release of the product increment. And this is why this is explicit in the Scrum Guide, that the product owner is not forced to release the product increment, whatever. This is important. It's only the responsibility of the development team to build it, but the product owner is not forced to release it. It includes this possibility that if the product owner thinks that this is not the right moment, and maybe the product doesn't have enough features, or the market has somehow changed or shifted, and it doesn't make sense to release it right now, it can wait another sprint or can postpone the decision to a later point. If I'm noticing this correctly, somebody has raised their hands. So let's see if we can get a live question. So I'm going to mute.
Hello. Hi, Valentine. My name is Zenale.
Hi.
I've got a question on, the value of the actual exam. I'm a delivery manager, have been for 4 months, and I'm trying to decide whether to do the Scrum Master or the Product Owner certification. So I don't know if you could just shed light as far as being a delivery manager, what would I get most value from?
Okay, so thank you very much for that live question. Well, as I was saying previously, both certifications are pretty similar. So typically the product owner certification makes more sense if you are somehow related to actually building a product. And I couldn't tell exactly from what you told me if that's the case. So if you are involved in building a product, and especially if you think that you will be involved in building a product in the near future, then the product owner certification may definitely help you more. If you just want to have an overall knowledge of Scrum and you're not sure if you're currently applying it or if you would be applying it in the future, the Scrum Master certification is broad enough to cover this as well. So I cannot imagine somebody complaining to you that you don't have this product owner certification. And of course, you can get it at a later time as well. It's not necessarily that you do both of them if that's a concern for you. So it really comes from the perspective: do you think you will have to do more with a product and have more responsibilities as a product owner, or do you think you'll be more like in the other side, like being a Scrum Master, overviewing the Scrum process itself and making overall improvements in the organization from this point of view? So I think this would be the criteria that I would look into. I hope that answers your questions. Please let me know if something is still unclear. And of course, if any other of you would like to raise their hands and ask a live question, that would be really, really great. We have another hand here. Let's hear this.
Well, hello there. I work in an organization that we are transforming to agile. Rather than doing project management, now we want to do product management. However, we have an issue with some products that receive so many support tickets, which we call it incidents. And we are struggling to find a way to deal with those incidents within sprints. So I'm not sure how Scrum should help in this, especially if it utilizes the team capacity, because incidents are unplanned events, and you have a plan for sprint or for your or release plan, and it might be affected by those incidents. So could you help me in this, please?
Okay, that is really a good question. Thank you for asking that. Now, the way Scrum typically works is, at least it basis on the predictability and availability of the development team during the sprint in order to do development work. Typically, this development work doesn't necessarily need to be new features. It can also be improvements to the software or bug fixes or any other things. Now, there are definitely various approaches, and just I wanted to clarify, this is something that has absolutely nothing to do with the contents of the exam, so do not worry, you will not get such advanced questions in the exam or such scenarios. This is just more related to the practical implementation of Scrum. And I know that this is an issue that many have when applying Scrum. Now, there might be different approaches to this. I don't know exactly how many incidents there are. The issue there may be that possibly the product does not have the necessarily quality. So what happens in a lot of projects is there this push to get things done, or to the push for creating a lot of features. And I'm referring here to software projects especially. And with this, there's also the term technical debt that you may have heard. So what you are currently experiencing, there may be technical debt showing its teeth, to say like that. So part of the issues may be technical debt. Now, of course, some products may always have some incidents regardless of sometimes the quality. There is a built-in level of support that needs to be handled. And in that regard, there are at least two ways on how to deal with that. You can look backwards and to have like an average, to have like an idea on how much support is needed during a sprint. Say, for example, every sprint, there are so many hours or so many days invested into handling these incidents. But just as well, so you can, when you know this information, then you can use this to reduce the capacity of the development team. So you know, say every developer once a day is unproductive. So then the development team can make a better estimate in terms of what's possible in a sprint. If you sort of a block like availability, and you know there are only so many days or so many hours in a day that are available for development, then this may be an approach. Another approach that may be better suited is either to have a separate team handling these incidents, separate from the development team. And Scrum isn't really the best framework, I think, in order to handle such scenarios. Because as I said in the beginning, Scrum really goes into the direction of having predictability, at least at the sprint planning, and not having so many interruptions during the sprint. I know this is not always possible. For that reason, Scrum is not always the best solution for everyone. But you may want to look into Kanban, and you may want to look into dedicating separate resources that handle this incident. So this is just one idea on how to handle it. But typically having this unpredictability during the sprint, this is not necessarily related to the product, to building the product and maintaining the product. It's more related to support. So that may help you. Got here another question. So let's hear it.
Hi, this is Ghulam. Am I audible?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, it's kind of you covered a little bit, but I always get confused with so many different versions of, everything is there. Like we talk about different certification on Scrums, then we have Safe Agile, there are Kanban, and on top of that we have other certifications of PMP. So I kind of get confused basically, how this need to be in ordered if someone really is working in the project management professional. Is it something still PMP is a valid on? We should go for it on top of, like the PSM I, PSM II, those kind of things. What do you suggest, where so many options are available, what we should do, we should not do, and what should be the direction?
Okay, that's a great question, and I know a lot of you are confused about this. Unfortunately, there's not like a direct answer to do this, or there's not a path for everyone to follow. And many of you may be in different situations, so you always need to try to identify where you currently are from a professional point of view and where you would like to go. And one way I want to, one idea that I want to give you is, of course, now it's not the best time to get an idea on how the job market is going, but maybe you're familiar with this website. It's called Indeed. And this allows you to search for jobs in any part of the world. And of course, the market may be different in India than it is in Europe, or than it is in the US or Australia or UK or anywhere else. So it's important to have an idea about what's happening regionally where you're trying to get a job. Because if I give you some advice that's valid for Europe or for a specific country, it may not be valid for where you're currently situated. Now, I would say that typically it is not a bad idea to get certifications, and definitely it's a very good idea to get different certifications. I was mentioning Indeed. On Indeed, you can search for jobs, either similar jobs that you are currently in a position, or feature positions that you are interested in. And what I recommend is looking at the job description and seeing inside the job descriptions if there are any required certifications. And additionally, if you're interested in a specific company, you may also want to look on LinkedIn and see which people work at that company that have the role that you're interested in. You may want to get in contact with them, or you may just want to scan their LinkedIn profile to see which kind of certifications they have. And I'm pretty sure nobody would mind if you send them a friendly message and say, hey, I saw that you work for this company and you are a Scrum Master, or you are, I don't know, maybe you're a project manager or a product owner or whatever. Do you know in your organization, is this certification required? Or what would you recommend me to do? Or just assert this information from their own profile. This may be an interesting way. But overall, you mentioned something very important. There are a lot of certifications out there. I think overall certifications, most of them are very expensive. And you may also want to have the company you are working for supporting you in getting that certification, because many organizations, at least in the past, used to have a budget for every individual to improve their skills. And you can also get some assistance within the organization regarding this. And definitely you may ask. Now, if you're on your own, the problem with most certifications is that they do tend to cost a lot of money. For example, Scrum.org is one of the most affordable certifications and well recognized that are out there, because they don't require you to attend any courses like on site, which anyway now is problematic. But in the past, this was like the way to go. You pay about $1,000 to attend a 2-day training, and after that, you can take a certification. And of course, for a company, $1,000 may not be so much. For you as a private individual, depending on your location, that might be a lot of money. Certainly for me, I would really think about where I want to invest my money when it comes to training. So that might be another aspect that you may want to consider and look into. Additionally, as you mentioned, there are a lot of certifications, and try to not focus only, for example, on Scrum.org. So as I was saying previously, maybe PSM II exam, it's definitely nice to have, and will definitely be a bonus point in your profile. But you may also want to look at other certifications that are relevant for the kind of position you want to get. So let's hear another question here.
Hi, sorry, it's me again. So I just want to take it back to the exam questions and the prep. I know that you say during the exam you should forget about that if you think the question is familiar, but I was wondering, would brain dumps be helpful in studying for this exam? And if yes, do you have any recommendations on what site to use for brain dumps?
First of all, you may want, I don't have any particular websites that I would recommend for brain dumps. I personally, when I'm trying to learn a new subject, I may want to create my own notes regarding that content. And sometimes mind maps where you can make connections between different ideas that you learn may also be useful. For that reason, I haven't really included in the course anything like giving you a summary of everything, because I wanted you to actually do this work of taking some notes or trying to put some ideas together so that they make sense for you and not necessarily for me. But if this was your question in terms of tooling and what can help you learn something, this is what I would do. I would simply take notes and try to understand different subjects, or to combine different ideas. Maybe use some simple cards. You can simply cut from a sheet of paper different blocks, and then you can write some ideas like attributes of the roles or responsibilities of the Scrum Master, of the Product Owner, if it makes it easier for you to learn, and also mind maps. So hopefully that helps you. Now, I've ignored a bit the chat, so give me a few seconds to go over the questions that are here in the chat, and I will try to answer them. So there's a question here that I'm not sure I fully understand, but I will try to answer it as well. Can I use other certificates, exam references to help me in PSM? Because I saw some questions don't have an answer in the Scrum Guide. This is definitely very true. Not all the questions are specific in the Scrum Guide. Now, when it comes to the exam, Scrum.org really recommends that you go through a lot of material, which part of it, I think it's outdated, and part of it is not 100% correct, at least not with the latest Scrum version, including some books that are in circulation and sometimes recommended. I would say the body of information that comes is probably 80 to 90% from the Scrum Guide. Now, there's also the Scrum Glossary. And the Scrum Glossary is sort of tricky because it explains a lot of terms and a lot of tools that may be used in Scrum. Most of them are not mandatory. But with the Scrum Guide, what the exam does is, with the Scrum Glossary, what the exam does is sort of like includes more ideas and more topics than especially included in the Scrum Guide. Now, in the course, I've already explained all the terms that are relevant for the exam. Some terms you may already know from your professional experience, but especially if you're new to Scrum, you may not know what a burn down chart is or other tools that are applied. So I would say the only really relevant additional pieces of information that you may encounter are coming from the Scrum Glossary. It's definitely good to take a closer look at those terms. And if there's anything in specific that you are unsure about, please let me know. Another question here regarding the product increment. Does the product increment belong solely to the development team or to the Scrum team? Can you explain about it? Well, this is something that's not really explained in the Scrum Guide. And I would say the product increment actually belongs to the organization who's paying for it, or for a customer who's paying for it, in terms of like who owns what has been built. So as soon as of course, the development team is responsible for building the product increment according to the definition of done. But after that, there is no ownership, at least from a Scrum perspective. Now, the entire product, of course, goes through these iterations for these increments. And still, the development team may still have the technical ownership regarding the quality of the product and what's being built in there. But at least if you're asking this from like a legal standpoint, the product itself and the product increment, they belong to the organization that has paid for them. So somebody here in the course mentioned a free source of learning. And I'm aware that there are a lot of resources out there. Sometimes they include exam questions. I typically advise you not to look at additional sources of questions, and mostly because the issue with this is they do not give you an explanation. So what I'm saying with this is you shouldn't trust me. When you're doing a mock exam from my courses, you shouldn't trust that if I say answer A is the correct one, that actually is the correct one. This is why for most questions, I've tried including also an explanation and also quotes from the Scrum Guide explaining why a particular answer is the correct one. Now, what happens with these sites is that you may get a lot of confusing questions where you think the correct answer is B, but the correct answer is C, and they do not include a reasoning for that. And this sort of like forces you to first of all, be very unsure about what you have learned so far, but also not be 100% sure why that answer is the correct one for that answer. It may also be false. So whatever you see online doesn't mean that everything is correct. So there should be definitely something to worry you if you find something online, any Scrum questions that don't include an explanation, and you cannot find your own explanation in the Scrum guide. So please be aware of that. I just wanted to repeat this. I had a lot of students who just focused on the mock exam questions from the courses, and they did absolutely fine in the exam. Not because you get the same questions in the exam, but because the questions cover the contents of the Scrum guide. And what's important here is for you to understand the contents of the Scrum guide and not to memorize questions and answers. Let's take a look at another question. Are there any other questions? I cannot find any others in chat. Yes, we have another one.
Hello, it's me again. I am confused about the sprint events, especially sprint review, the period between when we finish the sprint and going into another sprint, that is sprint review, then retrospective, then planning. How can we manage this? Because when the sprint ends, the next sprint starts. So the time counter is critical here. How can we manage this? Thank you.
Just to clarify, what is the source of your confusion?
It is, I'm not sure what you missed, but I'm saying sprint review and then sprint retrospective, and after that we have sprint planning. How can we manage the period between each event?
Okay, got it. So I know this is something that may confuse a lot of you. And in practice, this is quite straightforward. So you may not see it as an issue, but if you're learning, everything may still be very abstract. Especially for the exam, what you need to remember is there are no gaps between sprints. So just to recap, the sprint is the container for all events. So anything that happens is within a sprint. There's nothing. As soon as the development team, Scrum Master, and the product owner start working on a product, there are only sprints. Sprint 1, Sprint 2, Sprint 3. And between the sprints, there's nothing. So the last event in the sprints, or the way the sprint ends, let's say this is the last day of the sprint, what typically happens in the last day of the sprint is that the development work stops. There's no more developing going on, and everybody meets for the sprint review meeting. And then the product owner, and especially the product owner and the stakeholders, collaborate on what needs to be done next, especially if there's some valuable feedback that has been gathered in this meeting. Then this will be put into the product backlog. And it's not uncommon for the product backlog to contain new items after the sprint review. Now, this typically is a bit of confusing for a lot of people because you are accustomed to having also refinement meetings, or you think that the product backlog may be in this perfect state where it's ready for the next sprint. It may be, but there also can be some changes that occur in the sprint review. Now, right after the sprint review, there's the sprint retrospective. Again, a very important meeting because then the Scrum team looks back at the sprint that just ended. So everything is still very, very fresh in their memory. And they decide what went well and what can be improved in the future sprints, and may add some improvements to the next sprint just to optimize the way that they are building the product. And these are the last two events, and they typically happen one after the other. So you can imagine them that they happen in the same day. And the time boxes are typically generous enough, especially for 1 month, to allow for these events to happen in a single day. Now, as soon as the sprint retrospective ended, the sprint is over. And right right there and then. The next second starts the next sprint, and that is the sprint planning meeting. And there is no gap. There are no additional meetings that happen in between. Of course, if the previous day was full with this with the sprint review and sprint retrospective, it really depends on organizations and how large are the sprints, because this dictates how long can the events be. But it's also conceivable that in the same day, the next sprint starts with a sprint planning meeting. And then in the sprint planning meeting, the Scrum team meets and the product owner comes with a business objective. The product owner and the development team work together to craft a sprint goal. The development team will then select items from the product backlog into the sprint backlog, and then a next sprint starts. So this is what is happening. Again, there are no gaps. There's nothing that's happening between sprints. If, for example, in the sprint review meeting, there are some very, very important items that were added to the product backlog, then, of course, in the sprint planning meeting, there's nothing stopping the development team and the product owner discussing the newly added items. Typically, in practice, there are maybe 1 or 2 additional items that may be added or need to be changed after the review. So it's not like during the entire sprint, the product owner doesn't collaborate with the stakeholders. It's just like last minute changes or last minute feedback that needs to go into that. And yeah, after that, the new sprint starts. So after the sprint planning meeting is over, the rest of the sprint is only occupied with the development work. So this is the main activity that happens during the sprint. So I hope that answers the question regarding what is the thing with these events, in which order they happen, and how exactly is this in practice. Just to sum up, they all happen one after the other. There are no gaps between the sprints. There are no gaps between the events. Nothing that happens in between the sprints. So yeah, I hope this helps. We are getting close to almost 1 hour since we started this call. If there are no other questions, maybe I'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if you would like to raise your hand, probably that will be the best way. Otherwise, you can still type a question in here, and after that, we'll wrap this up. In practice, can you explain what is the role of the business analyst in a team? This is something that is not explained in the Scrum Guide. So this is not something that appears somehow. So, of course, the organization may still include other roles. And this is sometimes very confusing because the Scrum Guide only mentions these roles. And actually, some exam questions mention management or mention project managers and such. And of course, they can still exist within the organization. So it doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's only like stakeholders and the development team running through the organizations and nobody else. They can still be business analysts. But the only party on the other side would be the product owner. So either the business analyst still exists as a role, but it will not be part of the team. It cannot be part of any other team. Or the product owner also does the role of a business analyst. But you may have the business analyst external to the Scrum team. External means not being part of the Scrum team. But you can still have the business analyst collaborating, for example, with the product owner. So that is one way on how this can happen. So in addition to the last question, the Scrum Master doesn't seem to have much impact aside from driving the team. The major responsibility of the Scrum Master. Well, this is, of course, something very hard to understand. And the reason for that is it seems that the Scrum Master isn't really doing a lot of things. Well, actually, the Scrum Master is doing a lot of things. And the Scrum Master role is very important and often very misunderstood in terms of responsibilities. Because as you remember from some questions, the Scrum Master is not the secretary of the development team. It's not supposed to organize meetings or to book conference rooms or to ensure that if the daily Scrum is somehow happening remote, that it starts the meeting or things like this. This role is sometimes abused in organizations for such organizational purposes. This is not really the spirit of Scrum. The idea is for the Scrum Master to really support and improve overall the performance of the developer team. So the Scrum Master must ensure that the developer team is working at full capacity. It's always looking at how the development team is working, if there are improvements to be made. And it is a servant leader. It doesn't tell the developer team do this or do that, but it has this outside perspective on how things are going, because the Scrum Master is not involved either with adding features to the product backlog, also not occupied with developing the product. It is a role that sort of like doesn't supervise things, but it has this outside view. And through this servant leadership role, it can help the development team, but also the product owner, to take a look at what they are doing and overall to improve the process on how they are building the product. And it may seem like an easy thing. It's actually quite hard, because we are dealing here with people, and the Scrum Master role is actually in practice a very hard role. And oftentimes when the development team succeeds, or when the development team and the product owner succeed in building a product and delivering all these valuable features to clients and everybody's happy, most of the time the person that is in the background is the Scrum Master, but typically the Scrum Master is the person who has managed to get everyone at this level of productivity and success. Another question: can the product owner have more than one product backlog? The main rule is one product backlog. Now, if we make a separation that the product owner is just a role and not necessarily a person, then of course a person can have the product owner role for multiple products. And in this case, there are also multiple product backlogs, because if a product owner is responsible for 2 products, there will be 2 product backlogs. Not just because there's one product owner for both products doesn't mean that there's only one product backlog. This is the rule that you always need to remember. We are getting very, very close to the end, and I would like to thank everyone for joining today. Don't have any other additional time to answer any other questions. If there's still a need to answer questions, I'll be more than happy if you can send me a private message or post them in the Q&A section, or join for the next event. I haven't scheduled that, but most likely there will be another one. It has been amazing having all of you here and asking live questions. It has been much more interactive than the last time. And again, thank you all for being my students. I wish you good luck in your preparations for any of the exams, and hopefully we'll see you next time at another webinar. We'll stay in touch, and until then, have a good one.